On the line with us is Adam Tooze. He's a professor of history at Columbia University with a focus on economics and politics, the director of the European Institute, the author of several books, and his most recent, Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Challenged the World. I bought this book a couple of months ago and read much of it, maybe most of it, over the last month or so, and it's absolutely fascinating. Adam Tooze, TOOZE.com is his website. You can tweet him at Adam_Tooze. Adam, welcome to the program. Professor Tooze, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. I found your book fascinating. The last chapter in particular, you talked about the concerns and issues around 1914. And you know, I'm assuming probably you were writing that around 2014, but maybe not, and how we're in some ways seeing history repeat itself, at least with regard to your concerns and those of many economists. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I mean, I think, 1914 is an event that we've been arguing about for a century, and it seems to me to encapsulate many of the problems of the modern world, which are strikingly similar in some ways to what happened in 2008. And it's this weird way in which, on the one hand, the modern world generates enormous power structures which seem to be beyond the influence of any one individual, any one person, beyond democratic control as well. And then on the other hand, and precisely at the same time, they also create power structures which do enable individuals, largely men, generally of a particular class, to organize themselves and to exercise power in a very concerted way. And it's that weird kind of duality that I think the financial crisis of 2008 and the events leading up to the outbreak of World War I have in common.
I thought your characterization, detailed, day by day, blow by blow, of the financial crisis of 2008 was brilliant. I'm curious your thoughts now, having written the book and having published it and all, and time has passed. To what extent do you think that we actually have resolved the issues that provoked the George W. Bush, I refer to it as the Great Republican Crash of 2007, 2008, but if you want to take the partisanship out of it, fine. But to what extent are we not out of the woods with regard to that crash? To what extent are we still in that crash even?
I mean, I think we're out of the crash, but I mean, to use another analogy, we haven't fundamentally changed the vehicle. We've added seatbelts, we've added a guidance system, we've got better brakes on the system, maybe. But the vehicle itself is the same rickety old, high-speed death trap that it always has been, and it's most likely to generate crises in future as well. Whether they'll take the precise form that they did in 2008, I think, is an open question. But we do have slightly more security devices on the system, and we also have a certain amount of experience with dealing with it when it goes off the road. But it isn't in any fundamental way safer than it was before the crisis.
The issues that provoked the last crisis, the collateralization of mortgages, we're seeing this repeated now. Subprime mortgages are again hot. Subprime auto loans are hot. We've got over $1.5 trillion in the student loan market. A great piece in the Washington Post today about how Betsy DeVos could be provoking the next international financial crisis by winding back the regulation of the for-profit educational institutions and bringing back one of the most corrupt of the agencies that certifies educational institutions in a way that makes them eligible for federal funds. What are the things that you see that might provoke a crisis? What are the things that we should be looking for, with your historian and economist's eyes?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're looking for three things, and I don't quite see them coming together yet, not in the United States. You're looking for an asset class which is overpriced, a bubble-type asset, which will suddenly lose value. So student loans might fit that bill, or high-yield bonds in the corporate sector. But then you're also looking for those to be part of the balance sheets of vulnerable financial institutions, and they really need to be massively over-leveraged and short-term funded. And it was the fact that all those three things came together in 2008 that produced this epic banking meltdown on both sides of the Atlantic. Right now, I think we've got pieces of that story, but it's only really in China that you really see all three of them coming together. And the authorities there are really working very hard to defuse what everyone I can see is a time bomb. In the US, we have elements of the story. but not really the three bundled together, where you've got Citigroup, a $2 trillion bank with a huge amount of short-term funding holding, a couple of $100 billion worth of exposure to very bad mortgages. We don't quite have that combination yet in the current situation. We've certainly got the makings of the bad case of the flu in the United States economy. I'm not sure that we've got the makings of a heart attack.
Is it possible that asset class could be stocks? I mean, stocks are more overvalued now than they were in 2008.
Yeah, but they're not held. They're not held on the balance sheets of banks in the way that the fixed income securities were before 2008. So that's, I think, really the danger sign. When those three things come together, then all the lights are blinking red, and people should really, really pay attention.
What's the difference between the way that the United States has responded to this and other countries around the world? You mentioned China. What countries are doing a good job of battening down the hatches of solving the problems that provoke these kind of crises, and what countries are doing the worst jobs? And what can we learn from both?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I give the U.S. kind of a middling grade, to be honest. I mean, they moved quite quickly to recapitalize the American banks. Now, that's not, doing taxpayers any favors. In the end, they did make a decent return on the investment, but that's really in the interest of bank shareholders. Banks should have been properly capitalized in the first place. But getting them to the place where they are well capitalized is a step in the direction of stability. I mean, the people who really lag behind were the Europeans, where you've still got banks like Deutsche Bank, systemically important financial institutions, currently rated the most dangerous bank in the world. The Chinese authorities characteristically seem to just quite uninhibitedly be going about squashing the shadow banking sector right now because they just think it's dangerous. How far they're succeeding at that, we don't really know. Beijing was obviously rather opaque. But they at least are doing the kind of preemptive action that no one in the West was doing before 2007-8. So I'd give the U.S. a kind of middling score above the Europeans. But historically speaking, Beijing is moving more quickly than any of us in the West did before 2008.
Howe and Strauss wrote a book years ago, back in the late 90s, titled The Fourth Turning, and they pointed out that roughly every 80 years, leveraging Arnold Toynbee's great quote that when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last Great War dies, and that memory is lost to society, the horrors of that war, the next Great War becomes inevitable. And what they pointed out is that roughly every 80 years we have a massive financial crisis followed by a great war. In 1929, followed by World War II. The Great Crash of 1856, followed by the Civil War. The Great Crash of 1770, followed by the American Revolution. They literally take this back to the 16th century. And I'm wondering if you see any cycles of history in this. I mean, you were talking about 1914. 1914, of course, was followed by World War I. And there are many people out there, foreign policy experts, Zbigniew Brzezinski, before he died, was talking about this a lot, who are pointing out that the interlocking relationships that many of the countries around the world have, mutual defense relationships, are structurally very similar to what we had in 1914 in many regards. And that, a small incident like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand could trip something off, or something economic could trip off a war type event. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think historians generally come in different flavors. Some are more of the cyclical repetition type flavor. Personally, I'm more of a hockey stick kind of guy. In other words, I think modern history departs in really fundamental ways, and by modern I really mean 20th century, and indeed even I think you might say late 20th century. History departs in quite fundamental ways from the past. That's not necessarily an optimistic view. You take, say, the environmental question. Nothing in human history prepares us for what's coming our way in the next 50 years in terms of human-induced climate change. I tend to think of global capitalism as operating with a similar dynamic. And if you add atomic weapons into the story, then I think you similarly could claim there's a discontinuity. I mean, if we have another war like World War II, with all likelihood will, extinguish human life on the planet. So it won't be another one of the 80-year crises. The sort of place where you might see that kind of tension building up, it would seem to be most obviously East Asia. That's where there's a real great power confrontation. And the Trump administration seems bent, and not just the Trump administration, but the American security apparatus behind Trump, which probably would have backed up Hillary Clinton as president as well, seems bent on escalating tension with China. a regime which is quite manifestly committed to nationalism as an organizing ideology to hold the mass base of the Chinese regime together. That, I think, is a very difficult and dangerous situation. We already saw in 2014, under the Obama administration, how tense things got between Japan and China. I think that's a really worrying scenario. Whether or not, it ever gets to the point of an actual military confrontation, that's too hard to predict or foretell. But I think if you're looking for that kind of scenario, that's where you would look.
Fascinating stuff. Adam Tooze, professor of history at Columbia University. His new book, Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. Adam Tooze, TOOZE.com, the website. You can tweet him at Adam_Tooze. Professor Tooze, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
It's been great talking with you. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book and well worth the read.